Could Sebastian Vettel really make a shock comeback to Formula 1 next year with Mercedes? Well, that's the latest twist in an already frenetic silly season. Ed, what on earth is going on?
Well, Sebastian Vettel's been doing the rounds in the media, not the motorsport media, but the general world media. Well, I say world, but British media in particular, Sky News, Radio X, that kind of thing, to promote the purple energy drink that he's an investor in, of course. Now, in the course of those interviews, he talked about an F1 comeback, or rather he was asked about it, and he left the door open in a slightly tantalising way. He referred to having had conversations with Toto Wolff, although he did rather dampen down excitement about that by saying it was just conversations rather than talks about the Mercedes drive. But him talking about that to promote that energy drink has given rise to some rumours he might be considering a Formula 1 return. And of course, that meant that at Suzuka today, media day for the Japanese Grand Prix, it was a big talking point.
Well, speaking of Suzuka, let's head to the Japanese Grand Prix. This is Scott Mitchell-Mann.
While I don't want to rain on the parade of anybody who is celebrating the idea of a shock Sebastian Vettel comeback in Formula 1, especially with a front-running team like Mercedes, it doesn't really look like it's in the offing. He doesn't seem to be actually in serious contention at Mercedes, which wants to pay Vettel the respect he's due as a four-time world champion and someone with a very good relationship with Lewis Hamilton and team boss Toto Wolff. There are other drivers who are clearly ahead of him in the pecking order, and it would be quite extraordinary for Vettel to need to be the next in line option. That's despite Hamilton saying he would be an amazing option for Mercedes as a four-time world champion, an experienced driver, and a German driver driving for a German manufacturer as well. So there would seem to be a lot of boxes ticked there as far as Hamilton is concerned. But one of the best boxes that Vettel ticks is perhaps that he's not Fernando Alonso. Lewis didn't mention Alonso by name in his answer of who he'd like to replace him at Mercedes next season when Hamilton goes to Ferrari, but the way he described the need for a driver or a person who fits in with the Mercedes ethos and is a good team player and isn't divisive and isn't negative, it did have the air of poking at Alonso's reputation as a prickly character a little bit. Again, didn't mention Alonso by name, but everybody seemed to infer from it that Hamilton was saying you can sign anyone as long as it's not Fernando. Maybe doing Hamilton a little bit of a disservice there, but I think it's fair to say Lewis would rather see Vettel in a Mercedes than Alonso, but it just doesn't seem like something that's particularly likely to happen.
Okay, Ed, so can we definitively rule out Vettel going to Mercedes then? Is there any truth at all to this rumour?
Well, being definitive is always a risk and you can never say never, but right now he is not in the mix at Mercedes. He's not on Mercedes' list. As Scott alluded to, Toto Wolff was basically being polite. Why would you rule out and say, no, we don't want a driver of that reputation and success? But no, he's not a serious contender. Now, there's the interesting question of, should he be a contender? I personally don't think so. They have other better alternatives than a driver who, of course, will turn 37 in a few months. So he's kind of a driver of the past, and I just don't think that's what Mercedes needs right now. Plus, there's no evidence he actually wants a return to Formula 1. If he'd said emphatically, yes, I'm 100% all in, I want to come back, then maybe you'd think, possibly. But basically, he seems to be doing this to draw attention to his energy drink. And why not? Because that's such a great way to grab headlines, isn't it? To dangle the carrot of an F1 return. So I don't think he particularly wants to come back to Formula 1. In fact, I don't think he wants to come back to Formula 1 at all. And Mercedes don't want him. So it's close to impossible to see this happening. You never know. But yeah, we can be as definitive as we can be. But events and all that, you never know what might happen.
And I think the problem for Vettel as well, obviously he's had a couple of years out, that's not even really the core problem. You look at, Michael Schumacher, Kimi Räikkönen, Fernando Alonso, all of those drivers were able to stop and then come back. But the level they stopped at was obviously a lot higher than that level that, Vettel exited F1 at before. So, yeah, the Vettel of the past, he'd be a great option for Mercedes. But even the Vettel of 2021, 2022, and certainly now, just isn't a viable alternative for Mercedes. What about the rest of the grid, though, Ed? I mean, possibly the Audi Works team. Are there any other options that could interest Vettel?
Well, yeah, Sauber Audi is the one that, if Vettel really did want to pursue a comeback, seems like a good fit. He's German, hugely illustrious name, so will serve some of those purposes. Very, very experienced, so he could be there for a few years, play a part in building up that team. No evidence there consider him at all, let alone evidence he'd want to do it. But I think realistically, if Vettel wants an F1 comeback, it's not going to be with a top team. It's going to be with an up-and-coming team. But of course, he was with an up-and-coming team a few years ago with Aston Martin when he chose to retire from Formula 1. So I'm not sure whether he'd want to tread that path again, and I'm not sure whether the teams would want him. If he was all in, on an F1 return and on the market. I think there would be teams who'd look at him, who'd talk to him, who'd consider him, but there's no evidence that he really wants that, and this is anything other than just a bit of a publicity grab for his energy drink, and why not? Because it's a great way to do it.
Yeah, and theoretically it's a great story for F1, but I think the problem is if he goes in and isn't committed, then that's potentially an even more, disastrous and quite painful story. We've seen it many times with drivers, an initially exciting prospect can soon turn sour if the results don't come their way. So, Ed, then, if Vettel isn't racing in F1, where are we actually going to see him next?
Well, if he does come back, it seems far, far, far more likely to be at Le Mans or the World Endurance Championship for a full programme. He tested the Porsche that runs in the hypercar class, a Penske-run car recently. He seemed to enjoy it. So I think there's real interest there in doing something in endurance racing. And I think that would be a very, very good fit. It would be great to see how he gets on there. Much as I'd like to see him come back into Formula One, just from it's always great to see these drivers performing at that level. I think I'd be even more excited about him doing a hypercar class program, ideally a full championship. That seems to be what he wants to do, and that would fit in better. A Formula One season, 24 races, is a monstrous commitment. Now, WEC is not a weekends have a bit of fun every now and again thing. It is a serious commitment, but it's not quite at the same level. So I think if we're going to see Vettel back in racing, then it's going to be in WEC at Le Mans. There's been some questions about whether he could do it this year. I think it's a bit late for him to do Le Mans this year. But 2025, Vettel in sports cars, I like the idea, and I think he likes it too.
Yeah, it just fits in so much better with the very reason he left F1. He wanted to spend more time with his family and going back to the F1 circus. I mean, we've heard Alonso recently talking about the huge sacrifice it takes to still operate at the highest level. And yeah, that intensive schedule is not going to fit in with what Vettel wants from life anymore. So World Endurance Championship just seems like the more logical fit. Okay, what Mercedes going to do then? So it won't be Sebastian Vettel. Where do you see them going from here if he wasn't ever a possibility? Who is the most likely possibility?
Well, it's the same suite of options they had when Hamilton's shock move to Ferrari was revealed to them earlier this year. The top choice does appear to be Kimi Antonelli, who'll be 18 next year. He's racing in F2. He is rated as the next big thing. He's not just a Mercedes young driver who happens to be there. He is very highly rated and has been for some time. Huge amount of success since stepping up into single-seaters. He's won a total of 4 championships across F4 and Formula Regional. So the feeling is the drive is there for him. But it's going to depend how he does in F2, and it's going to depend on how he does in his old car F1 test. That programme's going to start at the Red Bull Ring later this month in a 2021 car, and I think that'll be very influential in whether he gets the drive. If it's not going to be Antonelli and they decide he's not ready for F1 or he needs to be loaned out to a Williams, say George Russell style for a few years, then there's options such as Carlos Sainz and, of course, Fernando Alonso. Alonso would be a great logical hit if they feel they're going to be a championship chasing team in 2025, but he's obviously not the long-term bet. He's 42 and even he can't hold back time forever. So I think he's seen as a fallback option if they need an interim possibility just to slot in for a year or two while they wait for Antonelli. And then as you move down, there's people like Esteban Ocon who they could resort to should they want to. But the absolutely astounding thing is for this top team, the number one choice does appear to be a rookie, Antonelli, and that's remarkable for a team of this standing. Okay, it's not winning world championships anymore, but it's still a top team in Formula One and it's working hard to be so again. And frankly, astonishing as it sounds, that Mercedes 2025 seat is Kimi Antonelli's to lose.